Welcome to Muslim Network TV. This is Malik Mujahid. Salam and peace. We're always there on Galaxy 19 satellite and also on Amazon Fire TV and Roku TV and Facebook and internet and YouTube and all over, and also on our website, muslimnetwork.tv. And this is Mujahid Talk, a talk show which we have here. And our producers are today's Zahra Nadeem and our great intern Sumaya Heather. And the majority of Americans say they do not know a Muslim. For many of these Americans, media is their window to the Muslim community. And however, the media content analysis say that 90% of media coverage about Islam and Muslims is negative. I remember being told my couple of months in America, and I was there to buy a secondhand car to a suburb. A friend of mine took me over there, and we were talking about his car, its value. When the person came forward and whispered in my ear, "I will not trade your camel for your car, for my car." I had no idea what is the reference of camel there. So I asked my friend Charles, Charles, this is what he was saying before we move away. He said, Malik, this is a slur which is used in America about Muslim. I had no idea that I am so much tied to a camel until I hear that. Then later on in a Ramadan, I was coming from out of town. I took a train and came in downtown. I was coming out. I was in rush. So, on escalator, people who are standing on one side and people who want to keep moving there on the other side. So one lady was blocking my way. I politely requested, would you mind moving to the right side? Oh boy, she was upset. She says, go back to your country. I don't know what came in my mind. And I said, listen, you came first. You live first. And then I will think about leaving. Why people do that? Because they have no interaction with Muslims, but they'll watch media. And media portrayal 90% of the time is negative. And that's the research. And that research includes the headlines from New York Times and content analysis of Washington Post and major media. So the role of media in informing the public has never been more important and more critical, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. And we are seeing that the murder of George Floyd got all sensible people in America to stand up. That pretty soon the protest against the police violence has moved away in terms of narration to something else instead of focus on the violence which goes on. So at the same time, journalists constantly asked to cover more and more while they have less resources. So what can they do? So we'll be talking with two Muslims. One is a national Muslim leader who has been on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and his writings have appeared in major national news publications, including New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and LA Times, and that is no other than Salam al-Murayati. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Salam.
Glad to be with you, Imam Mujahid. Eid Mubarak to you and your whole family. And
Eid Kareem.
I hope Ramadan was transformative for everybody.
Well, Ramadan for me was, I can tell you, was definitely better, and I much needed it.
Yeah.
Salam is president and co-founder of Muslim Public Affairs Council. He oversees public affairs, Muslim Impact, it is known in the Muslim community. It's groundbreaking work of civic engagement, public policy, and advocacy. He's an expert on Islam in the West, Muslim reform movements, human rights, democracy, national security, and Middle East politics. He has spoken at White House, Capitol Hill, and represented the U.S. in the international human rights and religious freedom conferences. And with Salam, I would like to invite someone who decided to study journalism and work in the mainstream media. There's no other than Samana Siddiqui. Welcome, Salam, Samana.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Samana Siddiqui is a content manager at Sound Vision. She has written extensively about current affairs, Muslim family life, parenting, personal development, and other topics. She graduated from Concordia University's journalism program in Montreal, Canada. She lives with her family in Chicago. Well, welcome both of you. One is always in the media, other has studied media, and I can declare myself to be a victim of the media in some way. But we have now a Muslim network TV to have Muslim voices on there when they're absent. Right now, media is covering this protest movement. So before we go to coverage, media coverage of Islam and Muslim community, let's talk about how do you think media is covering the protest movement of Black freedom movement or Black liberation movement or Black Lives Matter movement in the aftermath of the George Floyd's murder, which hurts all of us so deeply.
Well, I don't think the media really has a good record in reporting anything that is complex or more than looking at one angle or through one prism. The media tends to be oversimplifying so much, and through that simplistic paradigm, you get you don't get an accurate depiction of what's going on. For example, we all know the vast majority of the protests are peaceful, and that all of our African American allies, brothers and sisters, have been working on this issue for decades, and as a country, we've burdened with that original sin of slavery for centuries. But the media tends to just look at one situation. If there's violence, that's where they go. And they make the protests look like they're all violent. And then people are becoming fed up with the protests. And at the end, the media is not getting a good appraisal from the public. I don't think the public relies on mainstream media anymore. Not CNN, definitely not Fox News, other than the cult of Trump supporters who are part of that that enterprise, and definitely not MSNBC. I think the ratings for them, although people watch those shows, in general, the views about that media is unfavorable. And even in the last 4 years, you mentioned, how Muslims have had a hard time to get on media. Well, if you don't say anything about Trump, you're not going to get on the media, and they want you to come and either bash him or, in some crazy way, maybe even support him in something. So if you don't have anything to say about that, then they're not interested in you. They're not interested in dealing with the problems of socioeconomic inequities, of justice, of education, of healthcare. They're only interested in, as they say, if it bleeds, it leads. Mm-hmm. And that still is a big problem with media.
Well, some of the things are changing during this pandemic. Mainstream media coverage and subscription are gone 60% up in terms of viewership. Social media as well as mobile is somewhat stagnant. And partisan media, which is extreme right and extreme left, has also suffered during this period. But this may be a temporary phenomena. What do you think, Samana, might be, the reason that narrative about the whole, focus on a innocent person being murdered?
I think the script hasn't changed. I started journalism school in 1993. And the first day in my Journalism 101 class, the question they asked you was, what is news? You have to define what news is, of course, because you have to report it. And the answer is the standard response, which I'm seeing in the George Floyd protests as well. It's not when dog bites man, it's when man bites dog. In other words, what's unusual, what will get attention, what's not what the majority is doing. So this is why I feel when I was watching, I wasn't able to participate in the protests personally, but as I was watching the coverage and reading about it, this was exactly the same narrative that I studied. And as Muslims, I know activists like Rada Salam and yourself have worked to try to change this. But the standard narrative of what is news is exactly the same. So the media is focusing on protests, is focusing on what is violent, what is actually the exception and not the norm. Because the norm is the millions of people who have come out and protested peacefully without any looting, any type of criminal activity. So I would say, first of all, that hasn't changed at all in almost 30 years, in my experience as somebody who studied journalism in school, at least in Canada. And it's the same in the US as well. I'm sorry, the second question you asked,
Well, let's make a transition a little bit. More than 10% of physicians who in pandemic are serving New York, saving lives of people, which is the epicenter of a pandemic in America, are Muslim. More than 10%. Actually, one lady which we interviewed on Muslim Network TV, Dr. Usma Sayed, she is not only pandemic expert, she works in 3 hospitals. She has 2 or 3 children, but she spends 16 hours a day trying to save lives. And she is chair of the Long Island, New York's COVID task force. But we don't see any coverage of Muslim trying to save lives.
Yeah, I think the problem is the word Muslim is only used when there's something negative happening. So they'll say a Muslim terrorist, a Muslim militant, a Muslim extremist. But if you have a Muslim doctor saving lives and Muslim essential workers risking their lives to help us survive this pandemic, or Muslim activists working for reform on police issues, they're not identified as Muslim. They're identified as the Maliks and the Samanas and and so on and so forth. And you have to think, oh, that person is actually Muslim. I think we have to come up with a different strategy, and that strategy needs to be incorporating all methods of media, not just the CNNs and the MSNBCs, not just the New York Times and the Washington Post. There are so many other sources of information that people are using, whether it's social media, whether it's online journals, whether it's shows like this. And I think we just need to be more, to have some lateral thinking in incorporating the multifaceted approaches to getting our message out. And at the end of the day, God says, in the story of Luqman and his son, even if you have anything good that is the weight of a mustard seed, God will bring it to light at some point. And even though we may think that what we're doing is very little and incremental, even the incremental is critical, because as we move more and more, we will push it to the edge, and I think we'll see results. And maybe we won't see it in our lifetime, but there will be results, inshallah.
In our lifetime, brother, in our lifetime. Keep praying for it, keep trying for that. We need to see some changes. Samana, do you think, Salam has brought this conversation back to Muslims, that media is what it is, but he's bringing a little bit of burden on the Muslim community. If there are 10% of all physicians in New York who are saving lives day and night, spending so much time taking a risk because they didn't have proper personal protective equipment either. Some of them are dying or injured. And one of my relatives called, and I have about 9 relatives who are physicians in New York. One of them thought that I have some relationship with Trump. He said, could you please, he called me from hospital. He tells me, could you please talk to President Trump and tell him to provide us some. He says that everybody who fell sick, doctor or nurse in his hospital, including chief of a hospital, when they were tested, they tested positive. I say because we are serving without being properly protected. So taking so much of risk, what Muslim physicians or Muslim community in New York would have done to bring some limelight to what these people were doing?
I think social media is an incredible tool to bring these stories. You mentioned ethnic and community media, for example. So a lot of them cover these stories. And if we have access to the links to those stories, Muslims as a community, we should be sharing them widely on our social media platforms. And if we are not on social media, because there are 3.5 billion people on social media right now, Facebook is the most popular out of these. And we should post it on our Facebook profiles, our Twitter profiles. And I've noticed when I do that, and other people I know do that, that's a lot of times how I read about these positive news stories. About 7-8 years ago, I started a Facebook page called Positive Muslim News. And that's all I do. I cut and paste. I copy and paste, and that's all I do. And people, respond. People share it. And it starts off, and this is how the news journalists rely on tips. They rely on people telling them information. So if you forward it to a journalist, you can say, I came across this article, maybe you guys should cover it. So we should definitely do that kind of advocacy. And I want to say back in the 90s, and I'm so honored actually to be on the show with Brother Salam, because back in the 90s when I was a college student, I watched how MPAC and then CARE was established in 1994, and how they started to push for better media representation of Muslims. And it was no longer just a letter to the editor here or there. It started becoming a consolidated effort. And this is what we need to do, make a consolidated effort as a community to put those stories out in front on our personal channels, our personal platforms, whatever influence we have, encouraging our children who are younger, who are on Instagram, for instance. We need to push these type of things. And that's how we as a community should be active. And this is how we started out 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago, when CARE and Impact were starting this work. And this is what made the difference in the end. We didn't get representation because journalists are nice people and they decided to be sympathetic. Sure, some of them are, but we had to push for it as a community. And that's when we got the results. And this is, I think, something that we have to learn. We've learned it to an extent, but we need to relearn it and push for it in this situation and this context as well.
Well, thank you so much. You're listening, you're watching. Well, I'm saying listening because we used to be Radio Islam and on Daily Radio Islam in Chicago. We are merged now to Muslim Network TV, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We're on Galaxy 19 satellite as well as Amazon Fire TV and Roku TV, and pretty soon will be on Apple TV. And with me is Salam Mori. Welcome back to Muslim Network Television. This is Malik Mujahid, your host. We're on Galaxy 19 satellite as well as Amazon TV and Roku TV, pretty soon on Apple TV as well. With me, Salam Raviati, who is president of Impact, and Samana Siddiqui, who is content manager at Sound Vision. You alluded before the break, Samana, that MPAC and other Muslim organizations have made an impact. So, are you of the opinion that the coverage of Muslims have relatively improved as compared to, say, 15, 20 years ago?
Improved is a hard word to say.
Mm.
I think I think there's stages. It's kind of a historical stage is how we got to the point we're at right now. I think there's better representation in terms of inclusion. Like Muslims are more included, we're more talked about, and of course 911 changed all that. I think that was a watershed moment for our community. But at the same time, whether it's balanced and fair, no, it's still you can see a lot of this. What surprises me personally is a lot of the same tropes that I grew up reading in the 80s as a child, as a teenager, and then in the 90s as a journalist are almost, maybe not to the same extent. There's a little bit more knowledge of Islam, but I would say those same biases are definitely there. And you see it in very, maybe not in overt ways, but in more covert ways, because it's no longer acceptable to report on Muslims in the way that pre-911 or even 10 years ago, journalists were allowed to write about. So I think that the overt negativity that we saw 25 years ago may be less, but the covert negativity is definitely still there. And it's expressed in different ways. And one of the examples that you gave with the exclusion of Muslim doctors contributing when we've had such a large percentage of us being involved in the COVID crisis is a prime example of that.
Salamist media is still digging into religion to find answers to individual behavior. Are they avoiding now implicating religion and everything as a sole explanation of a negative behavior? Or they are still at the same stage when it comes to Islam and Muslims?
I think they resort to religion when they're trying to figure out a motivation for something that is weird, abnormal, or violent. And they clamp onto religion. And I think it applies to a lesser extent, but still applies to Christians and Jews. It definitely applies to the largest extent to Muslims, that if there's a violent incident and it involves a Muslim, then all of a sudden it becomes an Islamic issue. So I think you have that.
And children are shown in the picture reading Quran as though
Right.
it is Quran
praying,
revealing them to do certain things.
Praying, and they show us being together. And so, yeah, that's still a problem. I don't think the media has figured out how to cover religion in general. It is covered. I mean, even Reza Aslam, when he had this show on religion on CNN, it covered things that were kind of out of the ordinary, even for Hindus and Mormons and others. It was just so. It was just weird. Let's put it that way.
I mean, he was covering some weird guy in India eating human flesh.
Right.
And that's how you are representing Hinduism.
Yeah, and so and stereotyping is stereotyping. We shouldn't allow that for anything. And not to say that Reza Aslam does great work. He's a great intellect. He's written good books that are thought provoking. But I'm just showing even he had to produce something that was out of the ordinary when it comes to really understanding religion. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. The other thing about Islam, the two tropes that continue to fester the media, fester the public from the media, are the first trope is Islam is a cult. It's not a real religion. That Allah is not God. We're worshiping some false god, a devil god, or something like that, Lucifer instead of Allah, as simply meaning the Arabic word for God. So it's a cult, and therefore, if we're a cult, we do not get the same First Amendment rights that other people do. And hence the Murfreesboro incident in Tennessee, where they're trying to build a mosque, and the city says you don't have the same rights as others because you're not a real religion. And the Department of Justice at that time, under the Obama administration, had to go and argue with the state and the county in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that Islam is actually a religion. So we're still feeling.
Don't you think a little bit of burden is on Muslim? Because
yes, of course.
Our statement of faith says, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but one God. But most of the time it is just translated, there is no God but Allah. So it seems that we are the one who are claiming that everybody else has no God and God is only Allah. Right. They're not calling Allah. So exactly. You'll find in a Sunday school and translations. So this mistranslation of Muslim trying, are we part of the problem here?
Yes, of course. If we're not part of the solution, we are part of the problem. that's not, to do this critique is not to get us off the hook. We are ultimately responsible. Nobody's going to do it for us. Nobody's going to come and say, here's $1 million to do Muslim network TV. We have to do it on our own. And I think,
Oh, please forward that check to me.
yeah. So we're stuck by taking responsibility. Just because we take responsibility doesn't mean that we're guilty or we're to blame for the whole problem, but we must take responsibility because that's part of leadership. The second trope is that Islam is a foreign religion. And here I think it goes to, sometimes we mix custom and culture with religion in our own community, whether it's Pakistani culture, Arab culture, so many different cultures. We infuse the cultural biases onto our religion, and that gives a false impression. And then on the macro level, the government still looks at foreign countries as a reference for Islam. They don't meet with American Muslims to talk about Islam. Trump goes to Saudi Arabia to do a peace mission with Islam, see how well that went. And even President Obama, remember his first speech to the Muslim world was in Turkey and then Egypt. He did not meet with American Muslims until the last 6 months of his last year of the second term as president.
This is so true. This is so true. I personally, I was elected national leader of the Democratic Party. I was member of the Credentials Committee, and there were 27 members. And remember when Hillary Clinton and Obama were neck to neck in the primary, nobody was winning. So our committee was supposed to vote and decide who is going to be the presidential candidate if none of them win primary. And I was staying quiet, not supporting any one of those. President Carter in the DNC 2008 took my hand in his hand and he says, Imam Mujahid, once Obama is elected, the whole framework is going to change and things like that. And reason I was so reluctant was that since he was told that he's a Muslim, he was making an extremely hard effort to have a huge distance with anything Islamic and Muslims.
Exactly.
Instead of saying, just like his black identity, when Reverend Wright came, his tapes became, and he said, well, he's like an uncle who has these ideas, and gave a speech in Philadelphia, which probably got him above the whole thing. And instead of confronting it, he tried to move away. So your criticism is right. He treated us as a foreign entity which need to be related to, while his own home in Chicago is just 5-6 houses away from the beautiful mosque which was built by Muhammad Ali. So Muhammad Ali is a Muslim. Everybody knows him. He lives in his neighborhood, and he goes to everywhere else in the world to talk about Islam than talking to Salam Muriati, much less me.
Right. Yeah. And he grew up listening to the Adhan in Indonesia. So yeah, I mean, of course he knew Muslims, and of course there were Muslims in his families. And I think General Colin Powell said it the best when I think it was on Face the Nation or Meet the Press, he said, so what if he were a Muslim? I mean, so what? Where are we as a country when we keep talking about freedom of religion and e pluribus unum and all these ideals, yet we still have these problems? It is that paradox that we find ourselves in dealing with the situation of police brutality as well. We talk about how we're a great country and we have all races and we're one United States, yet we're dealing with the problem of white supremacist violence and white supremacist ideology that is influencing our policy and culture.
Well, talking about this white supremacist, Samana, 86% victim of abuse at the hand of boyfriend and girlfriend. And these are 79% of those family violence is by white people. And nobody talks about religion there, but suddenly when it comes to any Muslim criminal doing anything to his spouse or her spouse, suddenly the, what is it called? Honor thing comes in. So what is it? I mean, it's a very common phenomena for angry lover attacking others, and in many cases killing or injuring people. And but why it changes completely when it comes to Muslim community?
Well, I think it's the same. If you look at it, it's not just with Muslims. If you see, whenever the issue of, even if we look right now with the protest with George Floyd, people who are questioning it and saying, "Oh, what about black on black crime?" They'll kind of deflect it, right? Instead of saying, yes, it's a problem, and it's a problem it's a general problem, whether it's honor killing or domestic violence. But at the same time, it's deflection, because instead of saying, what, yes, all communities have this issue, we, the majority, the people who are white supremacist or racist, will say, oh, it's not us, it's them. It's their issue. So it's very easy to draw that us and them line and ascribe, like what Brother Salam was saying about, that they don't believe in our God. Our God is different from their God. So it's an us and them. It's always drawing that distinction where they are lower and they are less, and it's their problem, and we are the ones who are better. So that kind of narrative is, you will see it even now in that covert way I mentioned earlier, that is there in the media as well. Because if we were going to talk about violence and we were going to look at FBI statistics, we would not be talking about Muslim terrorism at all. Trump would not be talking about Muslim terrorism at all. He'd be talking about white supremacy right now. That's the statistics confirmed. So on the issue of violence against women in specific, if you walk into any domestic violence shelter, as unfortunately I knew a Muslim woman who had gone to a shelter, and she said, you know what, it was everybody from every culture you can imagine. This is a universal problem, and this is not a Muslim problem. So this narrative, this game that the media likes to play, and it's still playing in its own way, in its subtle way, is still being played. And it's just about it boils down to just making it about us and them. You oppose George Floyd's murder. It's not the white cops that are the problem. What about black on black violence? What about them? They kill each other too. So this is all about deflection. That's the bottom line. It's about not dealing with the issue at hand, and instead of dealing with that, deflecting it back to the victims.
And I think what we got to do now is we have to zoom out and say, there's not one America, there are many Americas. And we should show the light on the positive America, the American people, those who are working for true harmony and diversity, and those who are working for justice versus those who are not working for justice. And we have the power within us to shift that lens towards what is good about what's happening in our society, and also expose the dangers that are happening in our society. But sometimes I feel that there's overexposure of that to make people feel like it's a helpless situation, and that it's hopeless and helpless. So we need to find that medium where we expose the injustice, but always show that people are working towards justice.
But some community can do that if Muslim voices are included by media on issues of right now. I mean, the whole thing which is dealing with the pandemic, or the issues which is, 1 person out of 4 in New York is in need of food. I mean, could you believe that the largest city, the richest country in the world, 25% of the population right now does not have food to eat?
Right.
I mean, so Muslim voices, I mean, I'm deeply concerned about it, and I'm pretty sure both of you are concerned about it. How do we include Muslim voices on this common concern of America, which is right now in front of us? We have the situation of police violence. We have the situation in disproportionately, the fresh immigrants in New York are dying. In Chicago, blacks are 30%, but 60% of all deaths are blacks. I mean, this is a little older statistics, but minorities are disproportionately impacted. But how can we bring our voices? Are we doing enough to write on this topic to be considered an expert? Do I have to sit down for 10 years and write a book to be considered that I have an opinion on this matter? What can I do here?
I'll let Samana answer that one.
As an insider, I think there's two levels. Embrace social media. I can't emphasize that enough, because social media, before we had things like Facebook and Twitter, we had gatekeepers in the media, and they decided, it was the editors who decided, is this story going to go in, or is this story going to go out, or not go in at all? Is it going to get the back page of the newspaper, or is it going to get the front page? We don't, alhamdulillah, this is such a unique moment in history. It's such a tremendous blessing to have social media. So any organization, whether it's Sound Vision or MPAC or any, they need to be at the forefront of amplifying those stories about Muslim involvement in whatever issue we're dealing with, hunger, poverty, COVID, whatever it is, and our direct involvement in it. So it's the responsibility of Muslim organizations, Muslim individuals. If you have Instagram, you're an influencer, use that, YouTube influencer. So I would say that level. But actually, even going back to the old-fashioned methods of press releases and things like that, we need to go back to that. We need to still inform the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is still, while there is I would say, a lack of trust, it is still something that a lot of people will say, I'm not going to believe that video I saw on Twitter until I see it written about in MSNBC or CNN, or until the news media. There is still a level of legitimacy that having an article in these mainstream or a news report in these mainstream news outlets has, that somebody's individual videotape or recording, rather, sorry, tape.
Well, since you brought social media twice in this conversation, it is important to know that right now there is a major conversation to boycott Facebook, because the way they are covering and the way they refuse to take out the hate messages and things of this nature. Facebook has been implicated directly in the genocide of Rohingya Muslims in Burma, allowing hate. They control WhatsApp, whose network are being used to lynch Muslims in India, and they're not doing anything whatsoever about that. So today is the major movement to boycott social media. Social media, I think, used to be more useful, but now the issue is that if you have a post on Facebook, it is Facebook as a policy allows your post. Say you have 1,000 people following you on social media. If you put a post there today, by their policy, it will be released to only 40 or 50 people. That is 4 or 5% only. And you want more, then you have to put money behind. Of course, if something extraordinary happened, people start sharing and all that. That's an extraordinary situation. So while I don't want to uh, overemphasize the control by the social media, and I accept that as a legitimate source. What I continuously see is when people are looking for legitimate, balanced information, as in the pandemic, we have seen 60% rise in New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and whatever is considered a mainstream media. For Muslims, of course, that mainstream media is not much helpful. So, but Twitter, unlike many other social media, Twitter is where all the opinion maker and the journalists are. Twitter is the ham radio of yesterdays, in which people are dipping in and learning about that. So bringing back to, are there some Muslims who are emerging as experts on the mainstream media, which was not the case, say, 15 years ago? Salam, are you expert?
There are. When you think of Hassan Minhaj, when you think of more people writing like Mujahid Ali in the New York Times, definitely that's an improvement, whether we agree or disagree with what they have to say. But there's more of a presence there. I think that I look at media as a tool. It's not like it's bad or it's good or it's we should adulate it or condemn it. It's like fire. Fire can be used to cook and warm things up, or it can be used to burn things down. And the media is the same way. It can show light and educate and do so much good if it's used in the right way, and it can do a lot of damage. So we're not going to do away with the media, and I think trying to put the blame all on the media, as you alluded to earlier, is also not healthy.
You're watching Muslim Network TV We are on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Amazon Fire and Roku. And of course, always on muslimnetwork.tv. And we're talking with Salam Muriati and Samana Siddiqui about the media coverage of Islam and Muslims, and also of current affairs. We'll be right back after these messages.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World's Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to $210 million. Two of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, a slow-burning genocide, on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tell of Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand with Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to MuslimNetwork.tv. We're always on Galaxy 19 as well as Amazon Fire TV and Roku and on social media, always 24/7 on MuslimNetwork.tv. And this is Malik Mujahid, your host, and I'm talking with Salam Muriati, President of MPAC, and Samana Siddiqui, Content Manager of Sound Vision. Let's talk about African American part of the Muslim community. Muslim community in America is a pretty diverse community. And if there is one ethnic group, which is probably a larger portion of it, is African American Muslims. Do you think, in the current crisis, not crisis, a protest for peace and justice, there is enough focus on Muslim American Muslim community? And has their coverage improved over a period of time?
No, I don't think so. I think there still is that schism that we have in our own community and lack of representation of African American Muslims in Muslim stories and Muslim narrative, and it applies across the board. And there's also, I believe, we have brought some of the baggage of colonialism from South Asia and the Middle East, those who have immigrated to the United States, and brought with them that kind of racism in our own community. If an African American Muslim wants to marry a Muslim of another background, usually there's that skepticism, if not outright rejection by families. I think it's improved considerably in the past few years, but I still think it's there. So it's not just a figment of the media's imagination, of course. I think also as a society in America, we're in that prism of white privilege. Even when they talk about Muslim issues, you usually find 3 white men who are not Muslim talking about that issue. So that we're all in that prism.
But when they do that, Salam, who among Muslim questions and challenges that why you're talking about Islam and Muslim, and there is no African American Muslim or immigrant Muslims or any type of Muslims there, and there are a bunch of white people talking about a community right here in our neighborhood? I mean, among Muslims, whose job it is to question and challenge that? I mean, you can say that, well, all of us should do that. But
I like I think doing a media critique is good, and there are groups that do that, and I think we need to do more of that, where we measure. This is your claim to freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And by the way, the First Amendment talks about freedom of the press, not just freedom of religion. And freedom of the press means that there's a wall of separation between the media and government. Now you find more people going back and forth between media and government. They used to be in the government, now they're in the media. And some of the most often quoted commentators in the media come from the military when it comes to the Muslim world. So freedom of speech and freedom of the press need to be cherished, and we should use that principle, which is also part of Islam and Islamic law, one of the goals of which is to protect freedom of expression, that we honor those who do that and we expose those who do not. And that kind of critique needs to happen more, instead of just chastising or decrying it all the time, but being very balanced ourselves. Here's the good in the media, and here's the bad in the media, and we should always be informing the public to be aware, so that they're more skeptical or use their minds, more critical thinking when they're receiving such information.
So, Samana, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, but also one thing I think is very important to mention is that I don't think we can underestimate how ignorant journalists remain and editors remain about Islam, even today, despite 911 and what's everything, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is so much ignorance. So, I mean, I think even if we need to directly approach, even call up the editor. It's so easy to contact or tweet an editor or a journalist and say, I saw this report, or I saw your news program, and you did not have one Muslim expert. If I was a Jewish person, or if I was a Christian, would you be doing that to me? I mean, that wouldn't be fair to have a completely non-Jewish panel talking about something, a Jewish community issue. Or, so I mean, bringing in the issue of fairness, the issue of balance, directly approaching editors and journalists is very important too. Because I think their level of, sometimes it's even unconscious. Like I remember once in my journalism class, this is 25 years ago, I picked up immediately the very subtle bias. Like they were talking about, Western Muslim men dressed in suits versus the traditional Muslim men dressed in traditional Muslim clothing. It was a very subtle thing, the way it was worded. And I brought it up in my classroom, and when my classmates said, I didn't even pick that up. I didn't even realize it. So this is the same situation we're seeing with journalists and editors today. Most of them, like you mentioned at the beginning of the program, have either never or very rarely met a Muslim, let alone had any kind of personal relationship or friendship with them. They are flying by the seat of their pants, really, a lot of them. They're not experts on Islam whatsoever. They go with what they already know, the person previous to them knew. We supply them with the experts. Say, you wanted a panel? Here are 6 Muslim experts I can point out to you right now that you could invite to your next program, or people you can interview for your article. So we provide the resources, and this is something I know CARE and Impact did. When they started out, this is what they were doing, and we should continue doing that work, because we need to provide those resources. We need to speak up for ourselves, because the media will not do it for us at all. We cannot rely on their good graces. They're in business. They don't care about us.
Right.
So Salam, let's say we got just 4 minutes left. I want to bring in that the point you were mentioning a little earlier, and connects with that is a practice which MPEC organizes people in Hollywood and honors who positively portray Muslims in the film industry. And you're doing that. Please tell us briefly, what is it and how long have you been doing it? And is there an impact of that effort?
I believe it has been a positive impact, where we honor positive portrayals of Islam and Muslims, and honor those who are promoting equity in storytelling, and not relying on the same old scapegoating and stereotypes. So we have an annual media award. It started in 1992, and there was a film called Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Mm-hmm. And in that movie, Morgan Freeman played an African Moor who was the intelligent one of the whole group, because that's when the Muslims were advanced in the sciences and medicine, in critical thinking, and so it really showed him as the bright one of, among these thieves, if you will, and he was always the one challenging people's conscience. So we honored the film. Morgan Freeman came. It was sort of like the Muslim Oscar. We gave him the award. He thanked us. He kept saying salam, salam, salam. And
he was trying to talk to you.
No, I think he's probably mixing it up, right? So we started that, and we honored Spike Lee for the making of the movie Malcolm X. We honored Alec Baldwin. We honored Hillary Clinton for the book It Takes a Village. We've honored so many in almost 30 years now, and it has made an impact, because now Hollywood is coming to us, exactly what Samana said. Now they're asking us to be that reliable resource. Give us this information about Islam. Can you connect us with people who can do script writing for us and pitch some stories for us? Can you provide some content? Can you consult on things? And so that's the little that we are doing that is making incremental positive change. And the more we do it, then the more it will grow, inshallah, to have more of an impact. So it is honoring those. And we've decided not to be the watchdog. We can let other people be a watchdog. But we want to be those that positively reinforce good storytelling and authentic storytelling when it comes to Islam and Muslims.
Well, thank you for your work, Salam Riyati, that I had the honor of participating in one of that program. And one thing I learned in that program, there was a young man, I forgot his name. I was giving him my card, and as soon as he saw Sound Vision, he started singing one of the songs in the Adam's World. Take me to the Kaaba. And I say, oh, do you know about that? He said, yeah, I grew up on Adam's World. And he's now in, I think he's a comedian in some Comedy Central, something like that. But that was a shock for me that Adam's World is producing comedians which are showing up in Hollywood. Samana, any last
any weight of good, even if it's a weight of a mustard seed, God would bring it to light. So I'm doing the good work, Malik. I'm really proud to be with you, and so honored to be with you. With all the great work you've done for the Muslim community.
Thank you, Samana. You have any parting thoughts for the Muslim community, how they can improve and take charge of their own narrative?
Definitely develop relationships. It's always in the end, no matter how much technology we have, what media platform we have, build those relationships with journalists and editors, and friendly relationships. I agree with Brother Salam that we should not be, confrontational and just be like always a watchdog, but encourage positive portrayals and say, you know what, you got this right, but you got this wrong too. And today it is very easy to access journalists and editors on Twitter. They're all out there. So shooting them a message, we should be proactive in how we respond to the way we are covered and the way other people are covered as well, out of fairness, because Muslims are a community of fairness and justice.
Well, thank you so much, Samana Siddiqui, who's content manager at Sound Vision and Impact president and founder Salam Al-Mariyati. This is Malik Mujahid. You can always watch our programs on Galaxy 19 satellites 24/7, Amazon Fire TV, as well as Roku TV, and pretty soon on Apple TV. And we're always there on muslimnetwork.tv, as well as YouTube and Facebook. And thank you, Connor Mays, our producer, and our assistant producer, Zahra Nadeem, and our great intern, Sumaya Heather. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Peace be with you.